Welcome to the CTO2CTO podcast, where Chief Technology Officers dig into the challenges and opportunities that leaders face every day at the intersection of business and innovation. I'm your host, Lucas Hendrich, CTO at Forte Group. Welcome to the CTO2CTO podcast. I'm your host, Lucas Hendrich, and today it is a great pleasure to have Ro Mohindroo with us to talk about her experience, her journey. She is currently, and correct me if I'm wrong, working with Digit, which is a consulting company. You're advising CTOs, startup CTOs. You've been a CIO, you've been a CDO or CDIO, and you started your career many years ago writing code.
Yes.
So maybe just as the first question, kind of take me through what you're doing now. I want to connect this because this is that we're breaking tradition. Usually this is CTO2CTO, but because you're advising CTOs, I think you'd have a very interesting perspective. So maybe you can tell me a little bit what you're doing right now.
Sure. Thank you, Lucas, for having me. Right now, I'm working with Digit. Digit is a company that I founded a few years ago with my husband. I'm providing advisory and consulting services to startup CEOs and CTOs, particularly around what it takes to scale the company. And startups are notorious for getting the job done, getting it started, I should say. But continuing that journey and scaling up the company requires a lot more than just the tech. So that's kind of my experience in the past, and that's what I'm bringing to the table.
So that leads to the first question I have for you, which is, I think everyone who works in technology, at some point there's a shift where you understand, you go from understanding the technology at a deep level to kind of what the levers are at a business level. And it requires you to kind of ramp up on a certain amount of financial intelligence, how markets work. And it's interesting how people make that transition. Sometimes it's formal through, getting an MBA to supplement. Sometimes it's purely practical. In my experience, it's purely practical experience. So I'm kind of curious, when was that moment in your career where your vision shifted or maybe was amplified to go from technology solutions to actually, moving the needle in a business sense? That makes sense.
I really love that question because it made me pause and think about that moment and really appreciate when that happened for me. I would say it happened when I was CTO at Rakuten, actually at Linkshare at the time. It's now been acquired by Rakuten. It's Rakuten Affiliate Network at the moment. And that was a startup when I joined. So talking about that experience of going from startup to scale-ups, our aspiration post-acquisition by Rakuten was to grow the business globally. This is back in the day when pre-cloud, so data centers were very much a thing. And that meant that to grow the business meant that we needed to really reduce in-country latency, which meant setting up new data centers, which, as you and your audience know, is not a small task. Fast forward, what we ended up doing was the platform had lots of challenges in terms of scaling up, and cloud was just coming on the scene. So from a technology perspective, it made a whole lot of sense to go move our platform to AWS and to redesign the data fabric that held the platform together so that we could have a distributed architecture. From a technology perspective, that was an awesome project to take on, very, very high risk. We got it done, but the impact of that made me pause, and that was my moment because we were, as a business, able to scale, double the size of the business, double the revenue, and beat our competitors to market in those countries that we moved into. And that was my moment where I went, whoa, yeah, that was a really cool tech project and we learned a lot, but the impact that we had to the business was tremendous. And that really shifted my mindset.
So I feel like when I've been involved in similar initiatives, there's a sense of leverage. There's this incredible sense of leverage, and that it starts off from a point of view of you're thinking mostly about risk, but then you see the huge gains. How have you seen that change now that cloud has become more expensive? There's a different kind of race going on for compute with AI, with GPUs. How do you see that changing now? How are you advising your startup CTOs and how to navigate that now?
Yeah, I think as technology leaders, we're expected to know technology, right? Or we wouldn't be technology leaders. And so my focus is more on making sure that clients, CTOs, and CEOs actually understand the business. And how do you bring that technology to better the business? And in a startup case, you're trying to grow the business. So really that understanding of the business and kind of helping clients, particularly CTOs, and I'm guilty of this as well, it's very easy to get into your little world and be awed by all the tech around you, because it is awesome, it's fun. And the application of that in the business world can be quite different. And that's the push that I give my clients is, while the tech is really cool, what business problem are we trying to solve?
What are the KPIs that you use as kind of heuristics in that? So.
Well, I mean, startups are, you have stakeholders and you have VCs and you have people that are investing in your company. So dollars always are important. At the end of the day, you are a business because you're in it to make money. Even nonprofits have a value KPI. So dollars are very important. And I think in this day and age, particularly, I was going to say speed, but it's really more about agility. How quickly can you adapt to what's happening around you? And do you have the capability to think differently about how to apply the tech?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think 10 years ago, time to market was the problem to solve. And now it is, I think we're in a moment of a lot of uncertainty. It's harder to make bets on architecture. So, and I know this is a tricky one to answer, but what's an example of how you would try to foster that agility in a startup now versus maybe 10 years ago where it was just a race for, how many users can we get on the platform?
Yeah. For me, I think it's been interesting learning experience for me as well to kind of start thinking about things not just from an architecture perspective, but from a reference architecture perspective. And the distinction for in my experience with the reference architecture is it allows you to connect the tech to the business and the capability. So you're starting with the capability of what the business needs and then plugging in the gaps around the tech. So that's been something different that I've learned along the way, and that's what I try to bring to my clients as well, is, again, it's a test of do you actually understand the business? And then that way when the capability that the business needs, it needs to change, you're able to look at something and say, well, that means we collectively need to make this change. And I think that working with the business is very important, and shifting the mindset of I'm working for the business to I'm working with the business. Yeah.
No, I like that a lot. And I like how that approach also forces you to think small.
Yes.
Because
then you can
modular.
Move faster.
Yes, exactly. So the problems you're solving are more discrete. You have reference architecture to solve those problems. And that, by its very nature, leaves you kind of agnostic, too, because you're not going all in on a large distributed kind of architecture.
Yeah. I think it is challenging, though, because you want to have a vision, right? As a member of the executive suite and the founder of a company, you have a vision for your company. And that vision is usually very big. I think on the technology side, leaders tend to be eager to get there. So we're thinking forward, which is what we get paid to do, but we need to execute in smaller pieces.
I agree. And I think it's easy for us as technology leaders to be distracted by the technology and see those as the goals or the KPIs.
Yeah.
How much, how frequently can we release into production only makes sense in a business context.
Yes.
Yeah. This wasn't a question I had thrown at you before, but I'm going to throw it out now just because I was thinking about your journey, and it's a topic on this podcast quite frequently. The role of the CTO is by default multidisciplinary, because if you take the point of view that business is guiding technology, not the other way around, business is incredibly diverse. So being a CTO can mean a million different things depending on where you are. Add to that titles of CIO and CDO and CDIO. Now there's the hybrid of Chief Product Technology Officer, which I think is probably where things are going, because that just further aligns you to business. So I'm kind of curious, when you explain to young people, in my case, my kids, when I try to say, what do I do? How would you distinguish Chief Digital versus Chief Information versus CTO? Do you think there's what makes the difference in that title?
I think the titles mattered in the past. Mm-hmm. They're converging. Mm-hmm. I've also played roles of a field CTO and field CIO. So those roles are definitely converging. I think it's more about what the business needs and the hat you're going to wear on that day. Historically, CTOs have been very focused on the technology aspects. CIOs have been focused on what does the business need to operate on a day-to-day basis, what's the technology. The digital one was always a question mark, but I think in today's climate, it's the forward-thinking CIOs and CTOs who are moving the needle on the transformation of the business tend to be called CDIOs. Mm-hmm. And then you have your field versions of that, which is really working with client CTOs and CIOs to implement the technology solutions that you brought to market. Mm-hmm. I think the distinction between whether you're focused on the field versus focused internally in terms of developing or creating the infrastructure for the company, those are distinctions, but they're starting to blend, particularly when some of those capabilities can be done with AI.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you don't really need 4 roles in the organization. What you do need is the operational maturity to do it well, so that those roles, and when they're merged, can not overwhelm the individual, but actually they can be effective in that combined role.
So then it becomes more about just delegating responsibilities. Who's responsible for moving what lever?
A little bit of that, but I think also really questioning how you're operating as a company, and is it effective? And I think historically, companies have stuck with traditional KPIs, and it's time to revisit whether those KPIs are really serving the needs of the business.
Tell me more about that.
So I think there is a trend towards value-based KPIs, right? So yes, you can measure operational KPIs from a tech perspective. Uptime was always a big one, latency, et cetera, performance. But there is no measure of experience that either the consumer is having or the employees are having. And traditionally, when you talk about experience, you hear things like engagement, employee engagement surveys, NPS, things of that nature. But I have yet to find a metric that actually measures the experience of the consumer or the employees having end to end.
That's a tricky one.
That is a tricky one.
and it's often survey based, which we know surveys are anecdotal. They're not. There's not a really good objective measurement of that.
Yeah,
it's interesting. It's interesting, and there is something, I think, in the nonprofit world, then it's really focused on outcomes, where you're having a somewhat direct impact on outcomes. But the operating model is completely different. Yes. So I'm wondering if there's something outcome-based in that.
Yeah, I think it's probably building upon the outcome. It's a little bit deeper understanding of how work is actually getting done, and then measuring what it takes to get done, right? So typically you would measure, number of invoices paid, but you're not historically looking at how long it takes to pay an invoice and the number of steps that are involved in that workflow and the overhead, the number of people, touch points, system touch points, data touch points, and the complexity that's in the environment. So something as simple as the number of touch points in a workflow or a process, it's really interesting to look at.
So this gets to another question, which is oftentimes the first generation of trying to implement an AI-based solution, is I think you've described it as being sort of surface level. But there's a deeper transformation that has to occur to really make an impact that maybe doesn't start with AI. What would you think about that? And maybe tell me a bit about your view on that.
About 10 years ago, I spent some time with two conversational AI companies, a startup and a scale-up. And this was pre-Gen AI.
Yeah, this is interesting. Yeah. Who remembers this?
But it was an amazing experience because even back then, clients were trying to layer on AI on top of the tech that they had for call centers, service desks, their websites, and expecting, spending millions of dollars on the technology and expecting amazing results, which was a hit or miss. And that goes back to when you layer on tech on top of broken systems, processes, and I would go as far as saying broken people, because now I think people are just exhausted with the amount of change that's happening in the workplace and the number of things they need to keep up on. So when you layer another piece of technology, whether it's AI or anything else, on top of that, the outcomes are not what you expect them to be.
No, I think it's something. I think the word dystopian comes to mind.
For sure. But the aspirations are much higher, right? And the expectations are much higher of what we think is going to happen as a result, which is always fascinating for me to hear, is we're doing the same thing but expecting different results.
Yeah.
And we know what that's the definition of.
Well, that's fascinating. and so 10 years ago, it was more, I guess they call it classical AI now, which makes me think of like the Renaissance or something.
Yeah.
And you're saying millions, now we're talking billions being spent on Gen AI. And I just read something yesterday in Fortune about 95% of Gen AI in enterprise projects or prototypes are not going anywhere, which isn't a huge surprise. But why do you think it's not a huge surprise? Because it sounds like it's following that trend.
Yeah, for those of us that have been there before, we've seen that pattern before as well, right? Like I think back 20 years ago when we did the cloud migration at Rakuten, it was the same thing. I mean, everybody wanted to move to the cloud, but cloud migrations weren't always successful. You would get there or not get there for various reasons because you didn't redesign the platform, you just lifted and shifted. And then you got there and realized, oh, this is really expensive. And now we need FinOps and we need a bunch of other stuff. So I think it's the same pattern repeating itself, just at a faster pace.
Which is good in a sense because we're learning faster.
Are we?
Well, one hopes. One could take an optimistic view. So there are a ton of contrasts between startups and enterprise, and you've worked in both, and you've navigated both pretty successfully. But what is it about large enterprise that you think is causes this phenomenon of just going all in and spending and not really getting the outcomes that you'd expect?
Yeah, I think in my experience, it's been the continued operating model around operating in silos. Because the company large enterprises wants big outcomes, but they're not connecting the dots. And one of the things I find very exciting working with smaller companies is that the dots connect, because there's less number of dots to connect. And then the challenge becomes when you're going from a startup to a scale-up, the number of dots start to multiply, and then you have the same challenge that you do in enterprises. And I think the difference between a scale-up and an enterprise is that in an enterprise, people stop trying to connect the dots. And that one of the areas that's been really intriguing to me is to understand, are we rewarding people for connecting the dots? Or are we rewarding them for staying within their silo? Yeah.
It's interesting. The whole question of incentive
is
very interesting. And what one may expect as behavior, but the actual behavior that you're getting is totally different. It makes me think of, I may not get this entirely right, one of my favorite books is Only the Paranoid Survive.
Yes.
And I think it's from that book, but it also is something that I know that Daniel Kahneman discusses in Thinking Fast and Slow. This phenomenon where you want your managers, if you're a CEO, and you have to have a management level. You can't have thousands of direct reports, maybe 70 if you're the CEO of NVIDIA. But so there's this phenomenon where you're trying to promote this culture of taking risks, and yet there really isn't a reward for taking risks in the enterprise at all. Yeah. It's quite the contrary. And I just wonder how that could be sorted out, Have you seen any ways to continue that incentive to take risks in larger organizations?
My experience in some of the large organizations, and I think in Rakuten in particular, I thought the company did it really well. We actually carved out days where the team could spend a day. It was usually Fridays, I think, way back then, because it wasn't conflicting with release nights, etc., to just work on whatever you wanted to work on. With the intent, and I think over time as we did that, it was also morphed into how do we now connect this idea to the larger vision for the company? And if it did, whether or not it was successful was a different story, but if it connected to the vision and it helped advance any of our key initiatives, then that was something you rewarded, and it was became part of the performance management process. And I think that's the exciting part, within a startup or a scale-up, you have the opportunity to try those things and see what makes sense for your culture and your company. Whereas I think in larger companies, you kind of stop doing that.
Yeah.
Right? Or you create an innovation lab that's somewhere stashed away, and then they're operating like a startup and then tend to have the same problems scaling up as startups do, because they need to come back and connect into the bigger picture.
Yeah, I think there's also something that happens in between as you grow to enterprise, where you accumulate a lot of technical debt. Yeah. And working on technical debt is, I think maybe some people enjoy it, but typically it's not the most innovative thing. Yeah. It's harder to connect to revenue because it's usually it's the drudgery. So maybe that has something to do with it. Maybe we need to be better at incentivizing how to tackle that kind of work. Yeah. Otherwise, it can feel it can create that silo effect too.
But I think there is a way to connect it to the larger business vision. I find it hard to believe that you're spending that kind of time and energy and money doing things that don't support the business. Then you ought to question why it's getting done in the first place. And if you look at something like, say, uptime or performance of the platforms or data movements, etc., those things are important to the business.
Yeah.
They're not done because technology people just felt like doing it. But maybe those are also those foundational things where the appetite for risk is lower.
Yeah. Well, I think also maybe the distance between your work and the customer increases kind of exponentially as the organization grows. So I often think that sometimes if someone could have that contact with the customer that understands the value proposition inherently, the challenge there is that you get to that level and you may not get the happy customer sharing.
Yeah, but I think this came out of my experience as a field CTO was asking the question. And I think, folks in tech can be a bit more curious outside of their boundaries as well. So as to, if this system went down, what would be the impact? Would a sales or a customer service rep be knocking on my door? I don't have to directly ask the customer that. Yeah. That would be embarrassing, actually, if I did. But you can ask people within the organization that are in those roles to understand what the impact would be. Yeah. And I think that really helps connect those dots as well.
Yeah, I think sometimes the challenge, too, is just really understanding, again, going back to that original kind of insight, understanding how what you're doing on a day-to-day basis connects to the growth of the business, the mission of the business. if that's well articulated or not. What's the North Star of the company? What's it trying to achieve finally?
Yeah.
And I think that can be diluted over time, especially if you have growth by acquisition with different visions, and one can become a cog in that wheel.
But be a curious cog.
A curious cog, yes. So you've been working on this series in Reworked that I want you to tell us a bit about what Reworked is. But you've been focusing on the employee experience and what you call the paradox with employee experience. So I'm really curious about that. I think our listeners would be too.
Yeah. So a little bit about Reworked. Reworked is a publication from Simpler Media. They focus on the future of work and the employee experience, which, in my opinion, is a neglected topic in the tech circles. I've been a subscriber to the publication for many years, connected with the editor last year about writing a series for them based, there is a lot of great pieces that get published and reworked. My passion was for taking all the experience I've had around employee experience and bringing that to the audience, and really about how to suggest a different approach to address that. So it turned into a 5-part series, which has just concluded this month, and it was super fun to work with the team there at Reworked. And I've been really passionate about this topic for years now, so it was really gratifying to bring it to realization.
So tell me more. What are tech leaders not acknowledging about the employee experience? What is the paradox?
I think it's more than just the tech leaders. It really is. I don't think CEOs or even boards are acknowledging that the employee experience is poor. We hear a lot about it from the employees, and we suffer as employees when we're in those roles. But it's neglected at the topmost levels. Nobody is talking about it at the board level. I think AI has shifted the conversation a little bit in some circles, but not enough. I think we are over-indexing still on the consumer experience and the customer experience, which needs to be challenged, and it continues to be poor. I'm sure we have each of us can cite examples around being a consumer and being a customer in the experience we're having on a day-to-day basis. So if millions and billions are being spent on customer experience, why do I as a consumer and a customer continue to experience what I do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, it seems like there's a problem with quantification of that sort of deadweight loss, meaning everyone's capable of contributing a certain amount. We're not getting the contribution that we could be getting.
Yes.
And the response to that is right now might be, well, maybe we need to replace the human in the loop. I mean, these are the things that you hear constantly, so it really kind of works against any kind of engagement at all.
Yeah, I think even if we are able to replace the human in the loop, we're still providing a service to someone. And say we're providing it to other agents or bots or whatever, robots. They're still going to have some expectations of, and I think robots will be a little bit less accepting of the experience that we're having as humans. There's still some expectation that these dots connect, and they just don't today. And I'm not sure if that's a failure. That's not necessarily a technology failure, because the tech exists to connect the dots. We're just not taking the time to do it, or perhaps missing which dots need to be connected and which don't.
Yeah.
Just because the dot's there doesn't mean it needs to be connected.
Yeah, I think where I see a lot of this is in the talent acquisition process too. Now, obviously, when we talk about employees going down the road and their experience, then that also manifests itself in sort of missed opportunities with people. But I think there's an immediate sort of you introduce AI into the talent acquisition process, it looks more efficient, but I think we're missing opportunities still.
Yeah.
I think there's there are a lot of, and at different moments, for companies, you need people with a certain, diversity of skills. Sometimes they're amazing at one thing, horrible at another thing, but there's a sort of generalistic view,
Yeah.
kind of like a recommended daily allowance of of talent that people are expected to have.
Yeah.
And it kind of pushes to the mean, as opposed to looking for what is it that someone actually can do well, enjoys doing,
Yes.
is motivated to
Yeah.
do, versus a sort of general, view of people.
Yeah.
Where do you see, like, what would be an example where you see a company is really failing in the employee engagement?
Oh, so many. I guess my pet peeve
Yes.
is, from an employee experience perspective, is the onboarding process, the offboarding processes, but the day-to-day lived experience of something like a help desk.
Mm-hmm.
Or a service desk that you provide as a service to your employees. That experience just boggles my mind. And I've been both as a CIO, the person providing the service, and then as an employee consuming the service. And that's not to say it's intentional, but the experience itself is very fragmented. It's just not a pleasant, and it's been the same way since when I first started my career.
Yeah.
You submit a ticket, the ticket may or may not get addressed, eventually it gets closed, somebody bothers you for a thumbs up or a thumbs down, and then everyone goes away. And there's not a whole lot of conversation around that. And now there is AI and conversational AI solutions that say, oh, let's have make the ticketing process a conversation. Why am I having a conversation about a ticket? And is that really the best use of company talent?
Yeah.
And time and resources, and that always fascinates me. And if you want to, when I step into engagements, that's one of the first things that pops out at me is, that was an interesting experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
And people just don't discuss it.
Yeah. So what do you think is the next step? What would be utopia for
I've always asked my teams when I've been in the provider role around that is, why does somebody need to open the ticket in the first place? Right? Kind of to prompt the thinking around, could this be a self-serve? But self-serve is just, to a degree taken too far, is just pushing the problem back to the user. So why are we having these problems? And I'm not sure we ask that question enough as technologists.
So kind of shifting left a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And why, and what do I need to do to make it go away?
Yeah.
Like not just to the step before, but entirely go away, which maybe is a change in the operating model.
Right. But if you can't see over the wall to whoever's in the next cubicle,
Right.
then it's hard to know. Yeah.
Or you're not asking the question.
Yeah.
I think sometimes just to get through the day, you're not engaging in that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So that leads to the next question, which is, what's something in tech that that you think really sucks and like pet peeve? And this may be one of them, but
Yeah.
What else would you point to?
The help desk is definitely one of them, and it's not just the IT help desk. You have similar experiences when you're calling in for customer service, where people are just passing the buck. If you're a patient and calling in to check on your test results, you just go around in circles.
Yeah.
And, so there's a lot of experiences like that where it's frustrating. But the help desk one is just ironic to me because it's tech people creating that experience and not questioning the value of that experience. The other big one for me is just the digital literacy at the exec level and at the board level. I think the gap there has gotten wider and wider as the tech continues to move at just unprecedented pace. That gap continues to widen. And we're not doing enough to really educate, right? And I think the board solution is, let's put a technologist on the board, or you get the CTO or the CIO a seat on the executive team. But that's where it ends.
Interesting.
And there is a lot of sound bites that go around and headlines that people grab onto, but the depth of that digital literacy doesn't go beyond that. And then you have your mid-managers and your leads that do know the subject, but that gap for me is getting wider and wider.
Yeah, I think in that creates a certain kind of animosity at an enterprise level,
Yeah.
right? That
Yeah.
that goes right to your employee experience. What is it they're not getting?
Yeah.
And
And I
don't
think
they
that's why
understand
a lot of companies, big and small, have trouble. Like when you ask them who owns the employee experience, you often get responses like, well, it's the CHRO, they own the employee experience. Well, no, they own.
It's a CFO tracking OpEx.
Or it's going to be the CFO, and you hardly ever hear it's the CEO.
Right, right.
You know, with an experience metric that's reported out to the board, just like we have a cybersecurity dashboard that gets reported out to the board. It would be awesome to see an experience dashboard that gets reported out, which should include things like how long does it take to actually get stuff done.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, what's
to get productive.
Yeah, which is the workflow in your organization that takes the longest.
Yeah, yeah, and I find it interesting too that sometimes, you know, if it's a tech-enabled company, which you could argue most companies are,
Yeah.
have to be in some regard. If there's any kind of internal R&D software development going on, that seems to be the nucleus of where that experience could improve, because it's the first to adopt agile processes, methodology. You have a lot of curiosity there, and you get kind of a instant gratification result when you design something and it works. You test it and you deploy it. It's interesting how that doesn't translate necessarily to other parts of the organization. And as the organization grows and those parts are necessary, then again, to your point, it's harder to connect that dot between what am I actually doing, what am I tasked with, and what's the value that it creates.
Yeah, I think that's that myth, that you also see in startups and going to scale-ups, is that technical excellence equals operational excellence.
Yes.
And it does not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. That's an area that absolutely needs to be invested in. If you want to operate at that level, then you have to invest in it. It's not going to happen because you have a bunch of brilliant people sitting around the table and getting a product out.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, the measure of success is going to be revenue, how the customer and the market receives your product, how you service the product, how you recognize revenue, how long does it take for your books to close every month, those kinds of things. So if you have a bunch of brilliant people, and it doesn't guarantee that you're going to operate the business at that level, and I think that gap, that disconnect is definitely one that I see often.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, it's really well put. Last question, and this is I'm stealing from other podcasts. One other podcast that I listen to that does this game of what is underrated or overrated, and I'm going to focus that. So those who know what that game is in that podcast, but I want you to tell me what you believe is underrated right now with AI and what is overrated. And when I say AI, I mean Gen AI, I mean automation, I mean the full spectrum. So what's something that you think is overblown, overrated, distracting, and what's something that you think has a ton of promise?
I would say overrated is probably the capability around general intelligence, the conversational part of it. That seems to be the surface level of what everybody thinks they're going to put in place, and things like Copilot, etc. Using that is considered using AI. To me, that's just how you should be operating your business. The tech is available. If it benefits your business, use it. So that's overrated and very surface level. I think
a magic bullet.
Yeah. I think people are just kind of doing those things so that they can say they're doing AI. And whereas that should just be table stakes, right? If new tech comes out and it benefits your business, you should always have that mindset and operating model where you're experimenting, and if it makes sense, educating your employee base and lifting them up to that level to take advantage of it. What's underrated probably is the impact that it can actually have on your business, particularly the back office and how you actually do work, which sadly requires you to understand how your business works on a day-to-day basis. But I think that's really underrated. And one of my favorite quotes, I think way back when, was from Jeff Bezos, where he said, the biggest impact for AI is what it does for you quietly in the background. Not things that you need to talk about. It just does the work for you.
Yeah.
And I think that can be true of any technology that you bring to the table.
I totally agree. And I think it becomes ubiquitous. It becomes a tool. I agree that the talk of superintelligence or AGI is, I think it's distracting, and the benchmarks around it I don't think are really relevant. You read every day that some model passed these benchmarks, and they're so far removed from any kind of KPI or benchmark that I think is immediately
day-to-day
relevant. One example of that would be, you'd expect AI to impact GDP.
Yeah.
Right?
Hasn't yet.
Hasn't yet. I mean, it probably will.
Yeah.
I think it probably will in ways which are to your point, just, tool adoption and not something sort of mythical, magical, which is the other human problem, that we love to anthropomorphize machines and things and think that we're creating this kind of consciousness, where at the end of the day, we're creating digital experiences where humans are still the consumers.
Yes. Yeah. And I think to the point earlier, eventually maybe agents will become the consumers of some of those services, but those expectations are going to be higher.
Yeah.
Because computers aren't always very forgiving. Tech isn't very forgiving.
Well, higher and totally different. Yeah, it requires a degree of clarity. LLMs don't handle ambiguity well at all. Although it's funny, I just said what I said, then I'll tell you I do this funny thing where I thank Claude if if I'm particularly pleased. Yeah. I feel like, just in case, it's a little insurance.
Yeah. Gartner recently had a piece around the role that technology is playing, which was fascinating to me. And the comment was made that maybe the shift is happening between treating technology as a tool to treating technology as a teammate, as a colleague, or as a partner. And I thought that was really interesting comment, because in my career it's always been a tool. Mm-hmm. But that shift in thinking about it as a partner was an interesting concept for me.
I think it's also kind of, if you have a dialogue with a person or with a chatbot or anything that can respond to you, oftentimes that dialogue is just reflecting back on your original question or insight. Mm-hmm. So I like that having a sounding board allows us to iterate faster on our ideas, our ideation. One of my favorite things to do is with Gen AI, and I put this as slightly underrated right now, although I think it's taking off wildly. The best utility I get out of vibe coding is I can create that interface so quickly with so little toil and setup, and immediately my product idea changes. What I thought I wanted, I'm already going to the second order of that. Well, that's great, but what if I could do this instead, or do this? Sort of breaking the shackles of that loop, I think is going to be a great, accelerator of value. But I think we're still
a ways from
it. Yeah. Ro, it's been wonderful having you on
Lucas.
the podcast. Really appreciate it.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
This was it for this episode. Join us next time for more real-world conversations between technology leaders. And if you like what you heard, subscribe to CTO2CTO. See you soon.